Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the study of life. The science of mind is the study of life and the nature of the laws of thought. The conception that we live in a spiritual universe, that God is in us, around us, and for us, and there is nothing against us. Dr. Holmes defines, Dr. Holmes is the founder of Religious Science, the United Centers for Spiritual Living. He wrote the book, The Science of Mind. And he said that spirituality is natural goodness, that God is not a person, God is a presence personified in us. He said spirituality is not a thing, it is the atmosphere of God's presence, goodness, truth, and beauty. I think that's the best definition of spirituality I have ever heard, and I've been around a while, as you might notice. Dr. Holmes talks a lot about the person to person himself, the person who discovers himself. So my topic today is the recipe for an enhanced life, permanent change. And I want to go back to The Science of Mind, the book. In The Science of Mind on page 445 says, peace is a conscious unity of the personal man with the inner principle of his life, that underlying current, flowing from a divine center, pressing ever forward into expression. But this can never come by proxy. We can hire others to work for us, to take care of our physical needs, but no one can live for us. This we must do for ourselves. End of reading. Often in life we see sometimes there's a great need or someone in need, something in the world, and we think somebody's taking care of that, I'm sure, or someone must be more qualified than I am to do it. And we sort of walk away. I want to share a thought with you that comes from Rosika Schrimmer. She said, the tragedy of a man is what dies inside him, in himself, while he still lives. The tragedy of a man is what dies inside himself, while he still lives. In preparing to be with you today, I found something that was given to me many years ago. And this was found in the Westminster Abbey, an Anglican bishop. And here's what he left for them. They found it in his tomb. And he said, when I was young and free and my imagination had no limits, I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change. So I shortened my sights somewhat and decided to change only my country. But it too seemed unmovable. As I grew into the twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those close to me. But alas, they would have none of it. And now, as I lie on my deathbed, I suddenly realize if I had only changed myself first, then by example, I would have changed my family. From their inspiration and encouragement, I would have even been able to better my country. And who knows, I may have even changed the world. End of quote. Just think about that. How many times have you had a chance to do something that can help the world, but you thought someone else was more qualified. Someone else should do that. Am I my brother's keeper is the question I must answer. Holmes says peace is the conscious unity of the personal man with the inner principle of his life. What's the inner principle of life? In a speech years ago, March 2nd, 1912, 89-year-old Theodore Roosevelt said this: there can be no 50% Americanism in this country. There's only room for 100% Americanism. Great words. The time when I felt I was most alive, the times when I really felt like I was living fully, was when I went 100% full out in what I was doing. And I think that many of you can say that. Many of you will recall at some time in your life, you really stretched. You really gave the most that you can give. And you knew you were giving it from the heart. You weren't being forced to, you didn't have to be paid for it. But this was something you really wanted to accomplish. And you did that full out, 100%. That's what this guy is talking about. You know, when Carolyn read that, peace is the power of the heart of God. It is through the revelation of the self to the self that one understands that he approaches the power which is in the heart of God. This comes through a recognition of the unity of the individual with the spirit back of it, in and through all. So when we really connect with the heart of God, you say, well, what does that mean? Connecting with the heart of God, knowing that the heart of God is the center and core of real unconditional love. When we connect with that, we find our oneness. We find something that really says, I am one with that. I am one of that. You know, in the Old Testament, Moses came to teach the law. In the New Testament, Jesus came to teach love. And that's why he was able to say with absolute conviction, the Father and I are one. Because he discovered the unconditional love of God in the Father's heart. And that's why he knew that even on the cross, he was able to love. Can you imagine a love like that? This is the love that makes us feel connected, that makes us feel oneness. It says this comes through a recognition of the unity of the individual with the spirit back of it, in and through all. So am I my brother's keeper? We can often look at co-creators. You know, it says that we forgot that we are co-creators with God on this plane, and it is the nature of our being to express that part of ourselves. It provides shade, beauty, it replenishes life, it is life-giving, it gives elements into the air we breathe, it even helps us get rid of air pollution, and it does all this just standing there. That's our gift, that we just have to join ourselves into the realization of our oneness with that which made us. You know, it says that we are made in the image and likeness of God. There is nothing bad about anybody until they begin to behave that way. Because they're made in the image and likeness of God too. They just don't behave like it. But do you? I ask myself, do I? I have to examine, make sure that what is coming from me comes through the heart of God, so that it is beneficial to all humankind. But that's the most meaningful part of your life. You haven't really felt the power of life until you have operated from that consciousness. So many of us, someone said, so many of us have convenient faith in others to perform our responsibility. And so we shook our responsibility because we said someone else should be doing that. And so that's convenient faith when we know it's going to be done. Bucky Fuller, whom I met years ago, I was in Huntington Beach, California. He came to speak to us just about 2 weeks before his wife died. He said, on spaceship Earth, there are no passengers, only crew. Think about that. There are no passengers. You're not a passenger here. You're a crew member. What does a crew member do on the journey? Serves. How well are we serving? You know, when we serve from our heart, that is the most meaningful thing. You cannot define it. The most meaningful thing that you can do, not only for yourself, but for the world. You don't have to try and save the world. You don't have to try and change the world. But if you change you, as that reading from that man that they discovered in his tomb, a bishop, he realized if he had changed himself, he would have died knowing that something meaningful happened through him. When are we going to change so that we operate, we function from the heart of God, where the true power of life is, where the true meaning of life is? Peace is an inner calm. On page 445 of Science of Mind, peace is an inner calm obtained through man's knowledge of what he believes and why. Without knowledge, there is no lasting peace. When you believe something, do you know why you believe it? When you say you believe something, can you prove to yourself without any fear that you know that's what you believe? Nothing can bring us peace but the revelation of the individual self to himself as a recognition of his relationship to the universe. When you feel a oneness with the heart of God, you feel a oneness with the universe. On page 119 from the Science of Mind, it says, suppose I do not say I am poor. You hear a lot of people say that these days, but listen to this. Suppose I do not say I am poor, but that I came into the world with an unconscious thought of poverty. So long as this thought remains, Dr. Holmes says, I am likely to remain poor. I may not understand the law, he says, but it will be working all the time. We came into this world with a subjective tendency toward conditions. That's what all of us come into the world with. But we must not forget that we are also dealing with a subjective tendency toward ultimate good. That's the heart of God. That's what we're dealing with, that subjective tendency toward ultimate good. Because in spite of all conditions, the race believes more in good than in evil. Otherwise, it would not continue to exist. Do you hear that? There are more people who believe in good, in the good that God is, in the good that is in the heart of God. That's why we're still alive on planet Earth. That's why planet Earth is still around. This is the eternal hope and sense of our life, he says. This is Holmes again, the encouraging message in all of this is, no matter what may be in the subjective state of our thought, the conscious state can change it. This is what treatment does. We heard about spiritual mind treatment, about affirmative prayer. How can this be done? Through the most direct method imaginable, by consciously knowing that there is no inherent tendency toward limitation. Hold on to that piece. There is no inherent tendency toward limitation. Limitation is not a divine quality, or it's not God's will, as some people think, that they're limited because it's God's will. That's such a poor understanding of what God really is, that spirit that created us. There's no inherent tendency toward limitation, no race suggestion operating through subjectivity, nothing in, around, or through us that believes in or accepts limitation in any way, shape, manner, or form. We do not stop here. This is only half the spiritual mind treatment. Then he says the conscious state must now provide a higher contemplation, a spiritual realization, which says, listen to this, I partake of the nature and bounty of all good, and I am now surrounded by everything which makes life worthwhile. That's the realization that he suggests that counteracts the idea that I am born with a consciousness, an unconscious conditioning of lack, of loss, of bad things. People think about that. The universal medium of, he says the universe immediately, the universal medium at once changes its thought. The moment we have that new idea, that new realization, the universal medium at once changes its thought, because its thought is deductive only, and it says, yes, I am all of these things in you. What? I partake of the nature and bounty of all good, and I am now surrounded by everything which makes life worthwhile. And the universe echoes that and says back to you, yes, I am all these things in you. And then it goes on to say, and immediately begins the work of bringing such conditions to pass. Do you realize that we have all the tools? We have the recipe to live a life, an enhanced life, a life of peace, joy, happiness, success, prosperity. We have all those tools. Immediately begins to bring that to pass. Whatever is held in consciousness until it becomes part of the subjective side of thought tends to take place in our affairs. Because the subjective side of thought is deductive. Anything that you repeat about yourself consistently has no choice but to demonstrate itself in your life, negative or positive. So the reason that we do not demonstrate more easily is that the subjective state of our thought is too often neutralized by the objective state. To put that in English, it says the reason that we don't demonstrate all the good things that we want in our lives is because our conscious thought that repeats all the negative things about ourselves overpowers the subconscious thought that started to have something good happen. And so we go back to the old habit of saying what we don't want. And most people spend their lives thinking about what they don't want to happen. And guess what happens? What ye fear shall come upon you. That's a principle. How can we get to the place where we have a realization of those tools? It says, by consciously knowing that there is no inherent tendency toward limitation. That is a principle, folks. There is no inherent tendency in nature of limitation, or no suggestion, no race suggestion operating through subjectivity. Nothing in, around, or through us that believes in or accepts limitation in any way, in any shape, in any manner or form. The reason that we do not demonstrate more easily is that the subjective state is too often neutralized by the objective state. That's by the person's constant thinking. This is really truly the study of life and the nature of the laws of thought. When we understand the laws of our thought, the laws of the thought that we are using, we learn how to live victoriously, peacefully, happily, and prosperous. I partake of the nature and bounty of good, all good, and I am now surrounded by everything that makes life worthwhile. The universal medium at once changes its thought because its thought is deductive. And it says, yes, I am all these things in you, and immediately begins to make that happen. Dr. Holmes wrote in The Science of Mind, peace is a conscious unity of the personal man with the inner principle of life, that underlying current flowing from a divine center, pressing ever forward into expression. That's the recipe. Whatever is held in consciousness until it becomes part of the subjective side of thought tends to take place in the world. That's part of the recipe. There is no inherent tendency toward limitation. That's part of the recipe. The conscious state must now provide a higher contemplation. That's the recipe. I've given you the recipe. If you could get a recording of this, play it back to yourself until it begins to make sense, because it is made of inviolable truth. Truth that cannot be denied, truth that can change your life to have the experience of wonderfulness in your life. That's why the affirmation is reading this way. Today, I am open to the constant awareness of where I am and to the awakening of where I want to be. This awakening energizes my creative activity, and the power of spirit moves me toward the first attention of my dream. Is there anybody here dreaming that they're going to have a terrible life? No. You all dream to have a wonderful life. This is what that affirmation is implying to your soul, to your consciousness. And so it is. Thank you for listening. God bless you. I love you. And I hope you take something away from this, that you can begin to experience permanent change toward a life that is enhancing, powerful, and under your control. Thank you.